On a quiet country road in Queensland, nothing felt urgent and everything seemed ordinary. The kind of place where drivers don't expect surprises and familiar crossings feel safe simply because nothing has gone wrong before. A freight train was already on its way, heavy and committed to its path, unable to slow down quickly or change direction, while at the same time a truck was rolling toward the same crossing, the driver having crossed it many times without incident. This time, though, was different because when the train finally came into view, there was no longer enough distance to stop. There were no flashing lights or barriers to warn what was coming, only a moment where a decision had to be made, and in that moment, two normal journeys collided, turning an ordinary afternoon into a disaster that could not be undone. Gooray is a quiet rural area in southern Queensland, surrounded by wide-open farmland. The roads in Gooray are long and straight, built mainly for farm work and local travel. Traffic is light, and it is common for drivers to travel several minutes without seeing another vehicle. There are no busy intersections, no traffic lights, and very little noise. A railway line runs through this landscape, but trains do not pass often. Some weeks, only a handful of trains use this route, usually carrying grain during harvest season. Because of this, many road users rarely see a train at all, even if they cross the tracks regularly. At the Gooray Road crossing, there are no flashing lights or boom gates. This is known as a passive level crossing. Instead of active warnings, drivers are guided by signs painted on the road and a stop sign placed before the tracks. The system depends on the driver to stop, look both ways, and decide when it is safe to cross. Freight train 6839 was operating on a familiar route used many times before, running from Thallon to Fisherman Island. It was a grain service, part of the seasonal harvest operations that move crops from inland farms to port. The train was long and heavy, made up of two locomotives pulling dozens of loaded grain wagons. Inside the cab were two experienced drivers, both with decades of work behind them. They had spent years operating trains across Queensland and were familiar with this section of track. The truck involved in the collision was a heavy vehicle made up of a prime mover pulling a low-loader trailer. On the trailer was a skid steer, a small piece of machinery commonly used on farms. This was a normal setup for rural work, and nothing about the vehicle itself was unusual for the area. The driver had been working on a nearby farm and was making a routine trip, collecting the machinery and preparing to return by road. This was not an unfamiliar route. The driver had crossed the Gooray Road level crossing before and knew the road well, as many local drivers did. Before leaving the farm, the driver carried out standard pre-departure checks. These included making sure the trailer was connected properly and checking the braking system, steps that are part of normal practice when towing heavy equipment. During these checks, the driver noticed something that suggested the trailer brakes might not be working as expected. The issue was observed but not examined further, and no repairs or adjustments were made before the journey continued. As the train and the truck moved toward the crossing, they were traveling at similar speeds, each covering distance quickly but steadily. From far away, the road and the railway were visible, and, in theory, the two vehicles could have been seen by one another. But as both closed in on the crossing, they entered what investigators later described as a blind zone. Thick vegetation along the rail corridor blocked the view between the road and the tracks. For several hundred meters, the train was hidden from the road, and the truck was hidden from the train. During this time, neither driver could see the other. Both continued forward, unaware of how close they were to the same point. The crossing remained quiet, offering no active warning that danger was approaching. The train's horn was sounding and could be heard in the distance, but in open rural surroundings, sound alone was not enough to clearly signal how close or how fast the train was moving. Second by second, the distance between the train and the truck kept shrinking. And without clear sight of each other, neither side yet knew that they were already running out of time. As the train came out of the blind zone, the crew finally saw the truck ahead, about 300 meters from the crossing. Almost immediately they realized the truck did not appear to be slowing down. There was no sign of hard braking, no sign that it was preparing to stop. With only seconds left, the driver placed the train into emergency braking and both crew members braced themselves, knowing there was no longer enough distance for the train to stop in time. At almost the same moment, the truck cleared the vegetation near the crossing. For the first time, the train was suddenly visible. The driver reacted instantly and applied the brakes, but the distance was already too short. As the truck slowed, the heavy trailer behind it continued to push forward, reducing the stopping power of the prime mover. In those final seconds, the driver understood that stopping before the tracks was no longer possible. With the train closing fast and no room left to brake safely, a decision had to be made immediately. The truck accelerated, trying to clear the crossing before the train arrived. The train reached the crossing just as the trailer was still across the tracks. The lead locomotive struck the low loader with immense force, hitting it broadside. The impact was sudden and unavoidable. The force of the collision tore the lead locomotive apart, lifting it off its wheels and pushing it sideways off the track. The second locomotive slammed into the first as the train compressed in on itself. Behind them, grain wagons derailed one after another, piling together as the train came apart. Metal, grain, and debris were thrown across the rail corridor. The trailer was destroyed. Farm equipment was ripped free and scattered nearby. Several wagons were damaged beyond repair, while others were left twisted and broken. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The noise faded, the movement ended, and in the quiet that followed, the scale of what had just happened became clear. In the moments after the collision, the scene was quiet but severely damaged. Both train crew members and the truck driver had suffered serious injuries. The locomotives were crushed and partly buried in the ground, making it impossible to leave the cab through normal exits. Despite their injuries, the people involved began to help one another. The truck driver was able to reach the locomotive and assist the train crew. Using the emergency exit window built into the cab, they worked together to remove the glass and create a way out. One by one, the crew members escaped through the window and reached safety outside. Emergency services were called and help was on the way, but in those first minutes, survival depended on cooperation and clear thinking under extreme stress. There were no fatalities that day. But the injuries were serious, and the damage was life-changing. For everyone involved, the consequences of those few seconds at the crossing would last far beyond the moment of impact. In the months that followed, the collision was examined in detail by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, an independent body responsible for investigating transport accidents. Their role was not to assign blame, but to understand exactly what happened and why. The investigation found that the train was operating correctly. It was travelling within the speed limit, its safety systems were functioning as designed, and the crew followed proper procedures. The horn was sounded, the brakes were applied when danger was recognised, and there were no mechanical faults with the locomotives or wagons. The crossing itself was also found to meet the required standards. It had the correct type of stop-controlled passive protection, appropriate road markings, and sufficient stopping distance. Investigators noted that the advance warning signs were installed in the wrong order, but concluded that this did not contribute to the accident and did not change the meaning of the warnings. Environmental conditions were ruled out. The weather was clear, the road and tracks were dry, and there was no sun glare at the time of the collision. There were no system failures, signal problems, or hidden hazards that explained what happened. The core findings focused on driver behavior and human factors. The truck did not stop at the crossing as required. Because trains pass through this area infrequently, the driver likely did not expect to encounter one, a condition known as expectation bias. This reduced the effectiveness of scanning for danger and led to an approach speed that left too little distance to stop safely. In the end, investigators concluded that the collision was not caused by a dramatic failure, but by a narrowing margin of safety. When stopping did not happen early enough, there was no remaining space to recover. A new assessment was carried out using the Australian Level Crossing Assessment Model, known as ALCAM. This review looked at traffic volumes, sightlines, road layout, and existing safety controls. The assessment confirmed that the crossing remained appropriate as a stop-controlled passive crossing. No major upgrades, such as boom gates or warning lights, were required following the assessment. The changes made were simple and restrained, reflecting the finding that the system itself had not failed, but depended on correct driver behavior to remain safe. As you think about this story, consider the crossings you use in your own life. The quiet ones, the familiar ones, the ones you've never seen a train at before. Do passive crossings still belong on modern roads? Is expectation bias more dangerous than speed? And when safety depends on human judgment alone, where should responsibility truly lie? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments.